Hey, this is Ron. Saturday morning, and the last time we met on Monday, we discussed looking at First Samuel. We were looking at really chapter 8 is where we started, and kind of just conceptually looked at what the relationship was between Samuel and Saul, and the servant there, and we were looking at it from the perspective of seeing different parts of ourselves and how that is developed and who we are and how we come to be where we are right now, and kind of pulling all that together, and I guess in a way becoming comfortable with who we are. So that was just a quick glimpse at that, and if necessary we can go back to it. Let's do what we always do. We'll start off and see if we have any questions or comments on anything that from our lessons or that may have grabbed your attention this week.
I, I do. Good morning. This is Audrey.
Hey, Audrey.
And just you're saying about us realizing who we are and all of that sort of segues into what I wanted to get people's comments on. But I saw this article on Yahoo a couple of days ago, and it was I think it was a trans person who said they had been feeling really sad. So they asked Chat GPT, that new AI thing. Anyway, they asked it to write a Bible verse about how what Jesus would feel about trans people. And I thought it was really interesting, the verse that it came up with. And I want to read it if people are up for it.
Sure.
Is that okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So this is the fake verse that the Chat GPT came up with. And a woman whose heart was divided between spirit and body came before him. This is what the Chat GPT generated. In quiet despair, she asked, Lord, I come to you estranged, for my spirit and body are not one. How shall I hope to enter the kingdom of God? Jesus looked upon her with kindness, replying, my child, blessed are those who strive for unity within themselves, for they shall know the deepest truths of my Father's creation. Be not afraid, for in the kingdom of God, there is no man nor woman, as all are one in spirit. The gates of my Father's kingdom will open for those who love and are loved, for God looks not upon the body, but the heart. Anyway, so that's what the chat came up with.
Wow.
Yes.
I love that. Yeah.
And I was like, whoa, if that verse is not in the Bible, it ought to be.
But it is in a different form. It pulls several of them
yes,
together.
You're right.
Yes. And not only that, that's what Native Americans feel about people who are homosexual or lesbian. That they are in their body are not one, but what they feel about them is that they are two people in one body. Oh my God.
Well, and isn't everybody searching to pull themselves into unity?
Yes.
Yeah, I was just floored when I read that. And the article was going. Sure, the article was going on to say that if only people who confess to be Christians could have the same kind of attitude, and they were right. But the article also went on to talk about, there was this Talmudic scholar who talked about the Talmud talks about 8 genders. The first 2 of which are when Genesis 1, when God created Adam as male and female together. And then Genesis 2, when he separated them. And then there's 6 others that I don't have a full understanding of them. I listened to them a couple of times, but I still needed to go back and listen again. But he said androgynous was one, which is neither male nor female, something called a tum-tum, something called an ionite hama, which is someone born female, but because of something that happens at birth or in life or something that causes them to not feel female. And then the iolite Adam, which is the opposite for a male. And then a Ceres hama, which is male at birth, but something happens either naturally or otherwise to cause them to feel different. And then a Ceres Adam, which is the opposite. Anyway, but I was just fascinated by the verse that the ChatGPT came up with, and then about these 8 genders that are identified in the Talmud. Anyway, I just wanted to hear other people's thoughts on that. If you have a minute to think about it and respond.
Hey, this is Nick. Yeah, in the best case, ChatGPT can synthesize or sort of take an aggregate of information and then sort of build something relatively new looking based on the content of what it is given. So if anything, that says to me that the Bible has a far more compassionate stance on those kinds of things than actual evangelicals or Christians do. And that reminds me of it was some article or some I'm looking at it right now in Newsweek, but it was the phenomenon of evangelicals and Christians in general rejecting the quote unquote liberal nature of the talking points of Jesus and the New Testament in particular as being too weak or not in line with the current overall attitude of conservatism. And if anything, that speaks to me of the extreme disconnect between even what is literally written in the Bible and the attitudes of people in religious settings in the United States. Thank you.
So they can't. So what they're saying is that Jesus is too liberal for them.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
And weak.
So yeah, and weak. So now what do we do with Jesus? We put him out the Bible, or we make him what we want him to be?
they make him whatever they want him to be.
Yeah, they've always made him what they wanted him to be.
But this is an overt admission of it like never before.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the verse that Audrey read that kind of floors me is I never expected that from AI. I see it as something that's programmed to do what man wants it to do. And with man's stance on God and how man, as we just stated, how man really feels about that sort of thing, that really kind of floors me, that it would come up with that, create that type of answer to the question that it was given. I wouldn't have thought it would have been programmed to do that. So that really surprises me.
Well, as Nick said, it does just look at its database, and then it takes an aggregate of what it finds. So it did not find anything that was against LGBTQ people.
And that in itself speaks volumes to us. That's a statement within itself.
Oh yeah, ask any religious person what the New Testament says about being gay. And when the answer comes up nothing, ask them to explain where they get their sort of animus towards that. And when they say their answer, which is that one verse about it being an abomination or whatever, then ask them, oh, are you Jewish? Because that's the Old Testament. I'm sorry, are you read the Torah? You go to
But Nick, it's even worse than that, because the same place where they get that from the Old Testament in Leviticus also says that dishonoring your parents is an abomination as well. So
Mhm.
you'll be stoned for that too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So just like we said, it's picking and choosing to match their own attitude. And as I've said before, their true religion is not Christianity or anything like that. It is conservatism. And the sort of white supremacist lowest common denominator of that, which is the root of conservatism in the modern sense, anyway.
I can understand why there's so many people that have questions about that chat, whatever, because all you need to do, if you're, for instance, an artist or an actress, all you need to do is say, give them a plot and ask them to write a story about it. And it can, and there goes all the writers. Or write a plot and have characters play the lines in the story, and there go all the actresses and actors. So, I mean, it has tremendous implications for other things as well.
Mm.
I wonder what it would say about writing a story about the truth of the Black experience in the USA as well as in the world in relationship to European culture. I wonder what story would come out of that.
But wouldn't that be based upon what information has been input? So if the information is biased based on the information that's given, right? So if you give them all of the information, then I wonder what would it come up with. What I'm saying in essence is this: the complete Bible was given to it, was put in. So the question is, has the complete story or history of the interaction with Africans and Europeans been put into the computer itself for it to make determination?
But it had to have not only the Bible, but databases of other spiritual beliefs and practices in order to come up with that answer.
You're right, yeah. But what I heard in that also was a are quite, heard in that was a mixture of everything that alludes to love and kindness that's in the scriptures without regard to what you think about people is in regard to what the scripture actually says. That's what I heard in that verse that Audrey read.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if it do the same thing as you said about with the African people.
The African people part, I was watching a segment of 60 Minutes, and they were talking about that and race, specifically Black people with AI, and how it can and has been used to manipulate or not having all the information. And that's what I guess the negative mindset that I had about it, based on what I heard there, and that's probably not fair to me or to the whole technology of it, but that it can and will be at some point used to manipulate and confuse and put in false data maybe. So that's what surprised me about what Audrey read, because I think the race thing is already sort of underway to be sort of manipulated and be confusing to people. So, and that was based on a study done by, it wasn't Harvard, but one of those universities that have been at this since on the ground floor, kind of a part of it. So I just thought that was interesting.
But but are we not in a position because of who we are to override the ill will that is supposed to bring and make sure that it does what it's supposed to?
Yes, I agree with that. And I guess as we discussed it, that was part of my concern, that it would be used as a weapon more than as an enhancement to for information. So.
Have we ever
Anyone else?
have we ever
I'm sorry.
no problem. Have we ever dealt directly with the sort of issue of homosexuality, or in this current case, trans identity or identity itself? Because I would like to go into that topic a bit more, if you like.
Sure, floor is yours, Nick.
Okay. So that issue is, of course, we're all familiar with the religious interpretation of that issue. And all of us, having been raised in the South, were probably at some point some degree of homophobic or, whatever. But having evolved our sense of self and our connection to our spirit and our understanding of the true nature of our relationship with the creator reality, we have, I would hope, grown out of that attitude for the most part, or all of that part. And the reason it was there in the first place is primarily because of religious indoctrination. Now, there's a difference between an accurate, let's say, metaphysical and spiritual assessment of the nature of that, or this phenomena, homosexuality, sort of trans identity, etc., and the religious attitude towards that phenomena. The religious attitude is, of course, one we're all familiar with, and that is in line with the overall sort of confusion of religiousness as it is produced from essentially the male ego, the male selfishness and desire to control as a sort of confused way of attempting to bring order to chaos, as opposed to understanding the true nature of that which appears before him, the sort of masculine nature of religion, and then responding to that reality appropriately. It is a projection of ego, selfish ego. And that sort of extremely negative, essentially hate-filled attitude towards homosexuality, trans identity, etc., is a product or an extension of that selfish ego projection. Now, I mentioned there's a distinction, I believe, between that sort of religious attitude and a sort of accurate spiritual and metaphysical description of that identity. And so primarily what we see is that sort of negative religious response. But the more accurate spiritual reality is that identity itself is, as we see, very fluid. However, there are archetypes and sort of opposite ends of the spectrum. In this case, that spectrum being one of masculinity and femininity, that exist in order to perform certain, perform spiritual work. And it is necessary, spiritually speaking, to understand the distinction between masculinity and femininity, and also the reason that there is that difference in the first place, in order to understand, I believe, the sort of other parts of the spectrum that exist in between those two archetypes, those two opposite ends of that spectrum. Have I made sense so far?
Yeah. May I add something to that?
Mm-hmm.
When we really think about what a male or a female is, and that's a social construct. And I'm not talking about anatomically. I'm talking about in terms of emotions, duties, responsibilities, actions, etc.
Yeah.
That's a social construct. There's nothing that says that a woman's supposed to act this way and a male that way. All of that socially constructed, and that in itself causes us to be biased towards femininity and masculinity, but biased in favor of masculinity because of the social construct. Suppose if we were to really delve into the scriptures and look at the way it really is, and look at the rulership in antiquity, and we began to see that there were more females in the place of rulership than males, and more of a balanced construct in society than it is now, then attitudes would have to be revamped, or our sense of labeling what's masculine, what's feminine will have to be altered in a very extensive way, because when we think about even the social construct from which all of this comes, it is based. The social construct is totally based upon what not only what males think it should be, but what a certain group of males think society should look like, and that group of males who think that what society should look like is nowhere near representative of society itself or representative of humanity itself. Therefore, the whole societal construct that we live in is selfish, racist, and totally biased towards those who constructed the society. I hope that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank
Good morning, everyone. Quick question to the group.
Hey, George, before you
And-
go, I want to ask Nick if that was in line with what he was saying.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And a good example of that, I forget where I was, the idea, a simple example of that, the idea that like men aren't supposed to clean. It's supposed to be the women that clean. So just, teen boys sitting around the house with dirty rooms and stuff because, their sisters are supposed to clean. Nonsense. That is an example of the insanity or confusion that comes with being biased towards that certain group of confused, egotistical males who project their dominance over the way we organize society. And it's stuff like that is arbitrary and completely foolish to say things like that. Or that you're not supposed to, I don't know, if you have kids, you're not supposed to change a diaper because you're a man. Ridiculous. It's there. I'm physically capable. I'll do it. That said, that is as we said, the sort of religious ego projection aspect of that. There are, of course, characteristics that distinguish masculinity and femininity that are important. And that speaks more to the, I believe, spiritual and metaphysical reality of what these things are. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My question to the group is, when we look at the egotistical male, in my experience as it relates to homosexuality, that egotistical male somewhat shows favor with the female more so than the male with the male. And just seeking an answer on that, does anyone else see that? And I see egotistical in an aspect of criminal domestic violence. The advocates for it, or the people that sit on the panel, they're against the male hitting the female. However, when a female abuses a male, whether psychologically, emotionally, or physically, they find that to be kind of humorous. So, but the original question is and was, why does the egotistical male show favor with the female? If I hope you understand what I'm saying, Reverend Richard, or does anyone understand what I'm saying?
You are referencing a social structure. That's how society is socially organized, and the very one who finds it funny that a female could physically abuse a male are the same ones who construct society in their. For example, the dominant mindset in this nation, which means in this world really, for a social concept or social construct of society is representative by the Southern mentality of white males more than anything else. And when you look at that in respect to society, what you find is that the most abusive areas for females is in southern states. It's in the place where Southerners are. South Carolina being the number one place where you could abuse a female and walk away from it with impunity. So again, you are speaking to a social construct that is put in place by the very ones who seek to dominate females and everyone else who don't look like them. So it's not. I don't see this any differently. when you talk about the abuse of males, females, etc., I don't see it any differently than I see any other abuse of humanity, of all of humans by a group of people. I don't see it as being any different whatsoever. And that is why I concur totally. One of the reasons, anyway, I concur totally with Nick's explanation and about how we got to where we are in terms of this separatism or this dominance between male and female. And I hope that helps somewhat, George. Is not totally, I'm sure that someone else has something to say in regards to that. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. How are you doing today?
Morning, morning.
Doing well, sir. How are you?
Doing well. Actually, I did not send this out, but last month I read an article. It was a short scholarly article that talked about all the different gender roles that there were in Africa, and when colonialism came, it didn't really know how to deal with them and didn't understand them. And I actually have a small clip of about 5 minutes, if you want me to play it, that explains what it is that we're talking about, but directly from Africa. And again, this is a scholarly article, and I can actually share it, the Audible, right now for a conversation if you like.
I'm good with it. Anybody
Sure.
else?
Okay.
I like to hear it.
Give me 1 second. I have to share my screen. Ms. Vermeil, I'm gonna take over as host, or try to, so that I can share my screen. Unless you, sorry. Sorry, do you know how to give me host privileges, Ms. Vermeil? If not, I'll try to do it.
You have to tell me how to do that.
Okay, just give me a second. Y'all,
It might be
go ahead.
it might be simpler if you play it on your phone and just like hold it up to your microphone.
Okay, all right, you're right. Okay. Okay. Oh, let me hang up on the phone because for that reason, give me 1 second. Signed on to Zoom as well.
English is my first language. A Khan ruler from and here's the article. In pre-colonial times, wrote the late feminist scholar Naira Sudar Kasa, women in West Africa were conspicuous in high places. They led armies, often played important consultative roles in politics, and in the case of the Lovedu people, present-day South Africa, they were even supreme reign queens. What is meant to be a woman in many African pre-colonial societies was not rigid. Among the Langi of northern Uganda, writes Sylvia Tamal, Dean of the Faculty of Law at Makerere University, Uganda, the Maduko, Dako, or effeminate males were treated as women and could marry men. There were also the Chibados or Kambanda of Angola, male diviners who some scholars have argued were believed to carry female spirits through anal sex. For centuries, woman-to-woman marriages in pre-colonial African societies seem to indicate to Europeans that the strong correspondence between male-to-man and female-to-woman was not prevalent in Africa. This practice of same-sex marriage was documented in more than 40 pre-colonial African societies. A woman could marry one or more women if she could secure the bride wealth necessary or was expected to uphold and augment kinship ties. The idea that a female could be a husband perplexed Europeans and often led to fantastical conclusions. Writing in 1938, the anthropologist Melvin Jean Herskovits imputed assumptions on women-to-women marriages that were, in the words of the anthropologist Eileen Jensen Craigie, foreign to the institution. He insisted that it is not to be doubted that occasionally homosexual women who have inherited wealth utilize this relationship to the woman they marry to satisfy themselves. Although he was operating on pure conjecture, no documented woman-to-woman marriages were known to be lesbian marriages. And while heterosexuality was certainly the dominant form of sexuality in pre-colonial Africa, Tamal notes that there is no doubt that same-sex copulation was also practiced. An anxiety that historians discern in historical record is how uncomfortable European travelers and later anthropological accounts were with the idea that their gendered worldview didn't easily map onto the societies they encountered. There is, among the Angolan pagan, much sodomy, wrote one Portuguese soldier in 1681, sharing one with the other their dirtiness and filth, dressing as women, and they call themselves by the name of the land, Gambadas. In another story, the Inquisition in Brazil had heard complaints of Francisco Manicongo, one of the Negro sodomites who serve as passive women, a Jinbada from Central Africa, who had to be punished for being a deviant in the eyes of Christians. Europeans adverse to what they call sodomy expressed distress towards the idea that some people whom they perceived as men would dare be considered by their societies as women. With what the slave trade and colonialism implied, that more often forced, but sometimes voluntary movement of people across the Atlantic, these transgressive gender performances became the target of the Inquisition. The church disseminated that the message that individuals who did not conform to their ideas of men and women could be a bad influence on Christian colonial society. One of those targeted was Victoria. Her story was popularized by the groundbreaking work of Brazilian queer historian Luiz Mott. We know of Victoria, originally a slave named Antonio from Benin, West Africa, from the authoritative accounts of the Portuguese Inquisition in Lisbon, which had her arrested in 1556. She dressed as a woman and worked in the riverbank of Lisbon, where she would beckon men like a woman, enticing them to sin. Under the questioning by the inquisitors, according to James H. Sweet, a historian at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, Victoria insisted that she was a woman and had the anatomy to prove it. The Inquisition was not convinced, and she was eventually given a life sentence. Whereas the Portuguese could only see deviance and sodomy, their feminine gestures, their same-sex behaviors were simply expressions of their broader spiritual roles that went completely unrecognized by the Portuguese. It would be anachronistic to call these ways of being transgender. That would be to retrofit them into gender categories that we use in the 21st century. But the theological frustration with deviance and sodomy that was often used to repress them is familiar today. As Tamal puts it, the ironic truth is that it is not homosexuality that is alien to Africa, but the far-off lands of Sodom and Gomorrah, plus the many other religious depictions of other sexuality that are often quoted in condemning same-sex relations on the continent. The same can be said about campaigns that intermittently condemn trans men and women in Africa. In Tamal's view, these are state-orchestrated moral panics serving as decoys to distract from socioeconomic and political dysfunction. What the memory of Victoria and the many other non-conforming victims of the Inquisition demonstrates is that it is not homosexuality and trans identities that are a colonial import into Africa, but homophobia and transphobia instead. Thank you all for listening, and y'all have a great night.
My apologies for the graphicness, some of the graphic language, but it's finished. Yes.
Thank you.
Sometimes you can't get a clear picture without graphic language.
Say it again.
Sometimes you can't get a clear picture without graphic language, and that wasn't graphic to me at all.
Okay.
Well,
Um,
Sheldon, the that article I was talking about expressed from the Talmud 8 different gender roles.
Mhm.
And this sounds similar to that. It didn't go into any real detail of their role in society, but it still sounds similar to what you just read.
Yes.
It did. May I say something to that? I don't think it's a coincidence that Sheldon listened at that video, and I don't think it's a coincidence that Audrey came across that article from Yahoo. I think it's very, very, very important that we note that the universe is sending us a powerful message. And that message that the universe is sending us is telling us to shift our doubt and our negativity about people based upon gender roles, shift it to a place of unicity as opposed to separateness. Because in this society, therein lies a whole host of people who are engaged in the same acts that they are pretending to be against. And if we note, we will see not only is it AI, not only is it the Talmud, not only is it the anthropologists, but the whole of the universe is telling us to get away from the social constructs and deal with people based upon spirituality as opposed to fake humanity, and see the reality of who we are and understand that there are no specific roles, there are no lines that's drawn to separate the roles of any sex, whether it's male or female or combination. There are no lines drawn to separate that at all. Matter of fact, everything in our society is fluid, it flows. And that is one of the main reasons that there are those who have desires that leans towards what we call bisexuality, have those feelings, those emotions, who are afraid to face them, and they end up doing things to themselves physically, or they end up having emotional issues because of how society looks at them. It is incumbent upon us, it's imperative that we begin to see what the universe is showing us. Thank you.
Thank you. Yep, Europeans were just as gay as everyone else, but the reason they brought so much chaos to it is because of their projection of selfishness onto that phenomenon. And they, in the way that they treated everything, they treated that phenomena with extreme hostility, mostly because they did not know how to understand that part of themselves. And I'm not saying like on an individual level, heterosexual men, I'm saying on a collective level, the attitude of their society did not know how to incorporate things that do not appear the same as them. And that hostility towards everything not them is exactly what they project onto the rest of the world, and this specific phenomena in particular. Now, I said
They did
earlier,
not know who they are.
yep, they were fighting because they did not know who they were. And I said earlier that there is the archetype represented by masculinity and femininity that sort of defines the spectrum. And then there's all the areas within that spectrum. However, the sort of regular, quote unquote, heterosexual relationship is the majority. It is because it is that spiritual archetype. But there's always exceptions to every rule. And just like Pastor Richard was saying, if you try to intellectually define or project that definition onto reality, you will always come up short, and you will always attempt to box that reality back into your own definition, as opposed to, or instead of, allowing reality to simply be what it is, and you sort of learning about what it is and the variation that is possible because of reality, as opposed to you attempting to define that reality yourself out of your own ego. I also said earlier that there is, I believe, a spiritually and metaphysically more accurate way to understand the nature of the homosexual or trans identity. But what is most important, I think, as we have seen in the examples of how Native society reacted to these identities, was that all people are just people. And the most important thing is to uphold harmony between people. And you accept people for who they are, and to project your own ego onto that thing is the actual evil act in this particular case. And more specifically, homosexuality and trans identity is not evil, quote unquote, in any sense, no more than anything that a heterosexual person would do that could be considered evil. Even if they didn't think it was. Like, it's all a spectrum, although there are archetypes and sort of the polarities on that spectrum that define that spectrum, that, when employed in the spiritual sense, allow the spiritual work to be done that is intended. And I can explain that, but the point is, the recognition that acceptance is necessary for harmony to exist is foundational to all Native society. And it is from that position of harmony that you can begin to understand all the nuance and the detail. Anyway, I hope that wasn't confusing. Thank you.
Wasn't confusing at all, and I appreciate it. Everybody who shared a portion of this. As everything we discussed, there's no coincidence. As Pastor said, there's tremendous value in this, and we yet to find or see what it is. All of it, anyway. Thank you. Anyone else, thoughts or questions?
I wanted to continue with another aspect of this phenomena that I believe we're seeing in our society as a whole as we move into the age of Aquarius and experience all the shifts in consciousness associated with that. But just want to make sure there's no questions and stuff before that. So as I've been saying, there is a metaphysical and spiritual necessity for the distinction between masculinity and femininity. And that is, as I mentioned, it is the most efficient means by which the work of spiritual, the spiritual work of the human being is completed, I believe. And if you think of, in terms of physics or science, the definition of energy is sort of the capacity to do work. And it is essentially the ability to get something done, for states to change. And in order for states to change, there must be a distinction in polarity, a distinction in charge, or however you want to think about it. There has to be a positive and a negative, and not negative in the sense of it being bad, quote unquote, but just as a something that is different from the other end. So you think about it like a battery. There's a positive side and a negative side. And it is because those two sides are distinct in sort of what they do and how they operate, that there is an energy flow between them. And it is that energy flow that accomplishes work, that allows things to get done. So think of that necessity of polarity, or that necessity of distinction, in the same in the distinction between masculinity and femininity. It is a distinction that allows for spiritual work to get done. It is in the resolving of the tension that exists between masculinity and femininity, like we always, the battle of the sexes. It is in resolving that tension, learning how to bring peace to that battle, that spiritual evolution and work is done and occurs. You do that within yourself individually. We do that collectively as well. And homosexuality and trans identity exists sort of within that spectrum. Every person has to understand themselves and learn how to perfect their own nature. So if you are a heterosexual man, you must learn what that means and figure out how to perfect what that is. If you are a heterosexual woman, you have to learn what that means and learn how to perfect what that is in yourself. And that same responsibility exists for every part of the spectrum between those two polarities of male and female.
Nate, excuse me for interrupting you. I want to make sure I'm understanding though.
Mhm.
This polarity that you're talking about, I get that. Go back to homosexuals and trans. Where do they fit in this again? Back up a minute and go back over that part. I understand the different aspects of the pole, but how does everybody fit into this again?
Yeah. So no man is pure masculinity. No woman is pure femininity, because those are spiritual archetypes. We
Okay.
are a mixture of the two. Now, a heterosexual man has, let's say, vastly more or more masculinity than femininity, and vice versa for a heterosexual woman. But whatever mixture of those two properties that exist within an individual, that's where you get your placement on that spectrum between the two archetypes of male and female, in terms of identity, in terms of spirituality.
Gotcha. Okay, I see it now.
Yeah. And
I have a question too.
oh, go ahead.
Sorry. We're finding, I mean, what you've described has been the basic understanding of physics or work based on a fairly narrow understanding of physics. And I say that to mean, as we look at, say, quantum computers or traveling, entangled, quantum entanglement, we see that we multiply the force exponentially by having an unknown state that becomes known when entangled, more so than the negative to positive. And I wonder if that's part of what this is showing too, is, we want to define those states and work with two known things, but by leaving them unknown and allowing for the entanglement, allowing for the reaction, the observation, we can do things like instantaneously travel between two large points in space over a great distance without a lot of energy waste, heat, whatever. You know what I'm saying?
I think so.
Well, yeah, I guess I was just saying with this, we keep wanting to define the positive and negative, the female and male, because it's our understanding of it. But it's by letting those concepts go that we see even greater potential for learning, for processing data, for traveling in space than we do by keeping them. Does that make sense?
Are you talking about we need to be from labeling things and allow them to be what they are and embrace
Yeah.
them for what they are?
Yeah, and allow
Is that
them
what
to
you're
be
saying?
all things. Yeah, not just
Right.
be.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. We keep imposing the negative or the female or the male, the negative or the positive, instead of
Right.
saying this has the potential to be all of those things, and in so being, it becomes what it needs to be for its highest purpose, or to
Yeah.
produce the greatest work.
So if I understand you, then if we define it, we're limiting ourselves. It's no longer spiritual, or we take that part away from it. Take the
Yeah.
full
Well, you
capacity.
put brackets,
Yeah.
right? You're putting brackets around it.
Yeah.
What we is putting brackets around it, and then once it moves beyond those brackets, now all of a sudden it's abnormal, or it's pagan, or it's something to be shunned. But if you just leave it alone and not attempt to put brackets around it, which is another way of saying not label it, then and let it be what it is, then humanity really becomes one entity, and there are no gender roles, there are no roles, period. It's just a flow of who we are, and that is what spirituality truly is.
Yeah.
I
Because
think that
because spirit is neither male nor female.
right.
Oh.
And we get this whole thing confused. We have been indoctrinated to see feminine energy as a female, and that's not it at all. The physicality of what we call a female has absolutely nothing to do with feminine energy, and that is the reason the verse that you read, Archie, said that the two struggles to become one, because within all of us are both. The question is, what do we have an affinity for? If your affinity is a femininity in your body is not speaking to that, is not showing that rather, then I don't have a right to label you as a man who is gay or who is homosexual and then begin to shun you. I have an obligation to embrace you for who you are and allow you you to be who you are without me trying to draw a circle around you, if that makes sense.
Or even more, how much do we limit ourselves because of we try to control our thoughts. We want to be masculine. We want to be this. We want to be that. We don't want to have certain thoughts, and we control ourselves and take away from our creativity and even our spirituality by labeling it and trying to make it be what we want to be. If we're both, do we use to the fullest capacity?
But Ron, whenever we do that to someone else, we're doing it to ourselves. I cannot limit who you are without limiting who I am. So if I label you as something, I'm also labeling me as something as well. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
Because then my expectations become, my expectations for you is that you be what I have labeled you to be, which means that I have to live within the confines of what I have labeled myself to be. But if I just simply see all of us in this physical world as being humans, then those labels don't fit. They don't limit us, and in that reality, we are, as Rainey was stated earlier, are able to travel great distances without using much of energy at all. But we are the ones who are imposed to struggle. I'm done.
Well, I think we impose the struggle, especially and I'm just sitting here thinking about it as we women in particular who are so we are so boxed in terms of in Christianity, our role is just wife and mother, or maybe sister, but it limits us so much in terms of what we are spiritually. And in the same way, men who see themselves as the cultural role also limit themselves. And I think maybe that's what's created such a divisive society that we have right now, in terms of race and gender. But we limit ourselves, and I guess it creates a certain kind of cognitive dissonance when we try to smash ourselves into that box of a role, without just allowing ourselves to just be. Anyway, thanks.
Could it be that all of this that's happening is the resistor that creates the energy, that creates the light, that creates enlightenment? And the reason why we feel it so much, and the reason why people call themselves we and they instead of he and she, is an indicator of what's happening spiritually, that we're getting away from the specific labels, that we're getting away from the egotistical projection of roles, various roles on human beings. So even though this seems to be chaotic, staying the course in terms of what we understand and what we know will cause this to create even more light and enlightenment and creativity and harmony and balance in the end.
I absolutely agree. One thing I want to add, though, is that I do not mean to say that in any way, shape, or form we should eliminate the concept of gender or eliminate the or pretend that there is not importance in the distinction. To say that that's gender shouldn't exist, or that there's no difference, is that's the I don't see color of gender. The understanding of the nature of the characteristics of the masculine and feminine spiritual archetypes is, I believe, important. It is that we should not impose our own sort of negative or selfish ego onto how those archetypes or characteristics sort of intertwine and express themselves in manifested or physical human beings, because as we've said, there's a range. But in terms of the archetypes themselves, those are sort of foundational metaphysical and spiritual characteristics of the created universe itself. And the interplay between the interplay between those two things is also related to our own sort of societal interplay, interpersonal interplay, etc. But
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Nick.
I'd add one thing, which is I wonder too, we talk about aliens. I don't know that the dichotomy that we see in our expression of creation would align with those aliens, right? I think there's so much, there can be so many different ways for these archetypes to be present in a living society and still be valid. I think I agree with you, Nick, for humanity, that is the case. But we've got, even on this earth, fish that can change gender, although it's still a dichotomy gender, right? Male, female. Although we do have the ones that have both. I have to wonder if there's more out there. And by allowing for it to be, we allow ourselves to see that, as opposed to only seeing what we see, and anything outside of that simply can't be. It simply can't be part of creation.
I agree. And I just went to that pretty good UFO conference a couple months ago or whenever that was. But let me say this, that gender distinction does exist for extraterrestrials and other kinds of beings. Because they are us. We are them less evolved in a way. But when you continue your evolution socially, spiritually, technologically, those gender distinctions do not automatically disappear. That depends on the way we structure society and essentially how we choose to evolve ourselves in a way. And you can also think of deities from various religions, but there's always the masculine and feminine counterpart, because as I mentioned, the space that creation takes place within is an extension or a sort of place wherein the distinction between the ultimate unity of the creator, the distinction between all the individual characteristics that collectively make up that ultimate unity of the creator, become distinct. Like creation is the space wherein they become physically or manifestly separate, at least in appearance. And therein lies the task of sort of learning how to reunify the total self. But anyway, I hope that I didn't just introduce a bunch of different confusing things. But my point is that that distinction can exist at all, let's say, manifest levels of creation. So it's not necessarily that you become a hermaphrodite or whatever when you ascend the astral planes or whatever, for lack of a better term. Now, outside of the realm of creation, there's no need for that distinction, if that makes sense, because creation is itself a place of learning wherein we learn how to get back to beginning, back to the source. And so to do the work of getting back, that's where that polarity or that distinction in masculine and femininity becomes useful. And then all the variation of the expression of that polarity or of that of those archetypes can be found.
Well, see, outside of creation, there's no reason to make those distinctions because it's impossible. Outside of creation, they don't exist.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Now, if the mentioning of extraterrestrials, I don't know who all is on the phone at the moment. It seems like it comes like way out of nowhere. We'll probably deal with that more formally at some point. But go ahead.
Would you hold for a second, please?
Sure.
I want to ask to make other people on the line of the discussion that's taking place because it's extremely important, especially when we see what we're just talking about in terms of gender labels, sexual labels, or however I don't even know how to put it. So I want to know if the others on this line, are you following what we're saying and understanding a bit clearer about homosexuality and the labels that's been placed on it? That's what I want to ask. Can someone please respond? Hello? Were you trying to say something?
It was breaking up, whoever was speaking.
Is this being understood? If not, it isn't. Just say so. Or
Yeah.
just say no. Is it?
Yes. Yes.
Someone said no. Hello?
I didn't hear anyone say no.
Oh, okay.
Can someone please sum up why this is necessary that we talk about this? I think we have, it's come up in the conversation, but just for anyone who may just think we're just out there a little bit.
I think it's important. I know it's important because we cannot expect to have harmony within humanity if we, humanity cannot, we cannot expect humanity to be in harmony if we don't understand the things that separate us. If we cannot understand the things that separate us, we don't know how to remove those walls between us. So when we begin, it's one thing to understand it on the base of race, on the base of female versus female in terms of misogyny. It's another thing to understand it politically, but it's a whole different area of understanding when it comes to the spiritual understanding of what we have deemed to be LGBT community. That those labels are not necessary and should not be there because they create separation within themselves. However, when we understand it based upon the verse from AI that Audrey read, and based upon what Sheldon, Sherrod, and Nick has talked about, when we began to see it from those perspectives, then we began to understand what we are really talking about when we say I am you and you are me, and all of us are one. We cannot say that we are one except for those who are homosexual or lesbian, or those who are gender neutral, or whatever they label themselves as. We cannot say that we are in harmony if we cannot say that they are us as we are them. So it is imperative that we get some type of understanding of the spiritual essence of all that this means when we talk about LGBTQ. Does that make sense? Or does that help?
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Pastor, the more we talk about what we're talking about today goes back to me. It really goes back to that we are not this body. Something that we've talked about previously. I'm done.
Okay, Nick. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, no. Thank you very much. I totally agree. I think one aspect of this whole phenomena I want to bring up, though, is that there are elements of, I want to be careful how I describe it, but there are elements of confusion in terms of one's identity and sense of self wrapped up within this phenomena as well. So I think one of the sort of characteristics of transitioning to the nature of our collective consciousness or collective awareness that is described by things like the age of Aquarius is that, as we have seen, there's a certain element of chaos that is maybe created by the transition. And it's not really created by the transition. It's sort of created by us in our resistance to that transition. But there is nevertheless a certain amount of confusion or chaos that takes place within all aspects of our sort of collective identity. It could be social, political, interpersonal, in terms of our sense of self, our gender identity, etc. All of those things have the chance to sort of be thrown into confusion as we make this transition. So there have always been sort of homosexual and trans sort of identities. But that is not to say that there's not also an element of confusion that is producing more of that as we make this transition. Now, as I said, I want to be careful how I describe this, because I do not mean to state in any way that it is okay to, as the sort of religious attitude is, to condemn this. It is rather something that must be understood spiritually and metaphysically. So, while I do think that there is an element of confusion that is created by this sort of shift in consciousness we are experiencing, there are most certainly still these kinds of identities that find themselves present in every age of humanity, regardless of transition or whatever. So one of the reasons that I kind of agree with, that I read in a source called The Law of One, which I definitely recommend to everyone. And it is I believe, sort of very information dense, very genuine source of general metaphysical and spiritual information. But it was just interesting because it was talking about the prevalence of homosexuality in particular. And one of the reasons that it can be expressed is the spirit being kind of unwilling to engage the complicatedness of the problem of the, as I mentioned, the battle of the sexes, of the relationship between men and women as a result of the chaos that is created by this transition. And I thought that was very interesting, and that idea resonated with me. Essentially, you can be unwilling to attempt to resolve that tension because of how great it is. And in terms of how that manifests, it manifests potentially in being homosexual rather than heterosexual. It's like a unwillingness to play the game because the game has gotten, there are no referees, the game has gotten too violent, etc. And that takes place on a spiritual level before you become, well, really before you enter a physical body. So it's a little bit like you can get a feel for the metaphysical and spiritual environment you are about to enter before you take on physical form, and you can gauge the nature of that environment. And if it's too chaotic, then it's possible you may make the decision to disengage from the archetypal sort of spiritual relationships that are present there. But I wanted to bring that up as an example of the chaos and confusion that is possible, that also contributes to the prevalence of this sort of distinction in gender identity, and why these things can manifest. Now, as I said, I agree with that possibility. And if you ever read The Law of One, and you can actually read that in its entirety for free on lawofone.net, and you can search by topic. I highly recommend it, but it may seem something like the kind of far out, even from what we talk about, depending on what you're reading. But like I said, I do believe that that is another very accurate and very genuine source of particularly metaphysical information. And it's pretty dense, but it is very good. Anyway, I bring that up because I thought it was a very interesting explanation for one of the reasons that homosexuality or sort of trans identity appears to be more prevalent now. And there's other reasons for that, but I do believe it is also related to this transition that we are making, the shift in consciousness we are all making, and some of the difficulty we are having with that. Anyway, thank you. Hope I was not confusing with that explanation.
I don't think you were confusing at all, and we thank you. This may be a good time to take a pause and let us kind of reflect on what we've discussed. And you mentioned here at the very end why it's so prevalent today, why we're where we are today. If no objections, we'll see how the discussion goes tomorrow. Maybe it'll be a good launching point, Nick. Don't know how close you are to being finished, but if you don't mind, we could start there tomorrow if there are no objections.
Sounds good to me.
Good to me. I don't have any objection.
Sounds good.
Okay. All right. Great discussion, guys, and we'll like I say, reflect on that. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Look
real
forward
quick.
to.
Sorry, that's
Yes,
yeah.
sir.
Lawofone.info, not lawone.net. I'm sorry.
.info. Okay. Okay. Thank you, sir. Have a great day, guys. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great
Thank
day.
you.
Miss you. That's good. Thank you. I appreciate it. See you next time.